What questions must we ask ourselves to understand the potential risks and benefits of a carbon credit project or program that might be presented to us? First, what do the rules of the carbon credit standard or of the carbon contract say about our rights? Understanding this is a first step for us to find out if our rights will be respected. We might need to ask allies and friends who can explain legal language that we are not used to. It is very important that the rules or the contract say clearly that our rights to lands, territories, and resources are to be respected, and that we retain our right to keep or withhold our participation or permissions for any project through the process of free, prior, and informed consent. AIPP. Second, will our way of life, cultural integrity, and traditional practices be respected? For example, will our community be stopped from continuing with rotational farming or gathering foods and materials from our forests? This has happened in some places because carbon project developers say that those activities are impacting carbon stored in forests. In practice, respect for our rights as indigenous peoples is only a reality if we can pursue our own way of life, enjoy our cultures, and live freely on our own lands and territories with dignity and respect. Third, are we treated as equal partners in carbon credit projects or programs? Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. That means we must be able to govern ourselves and decide what our economic, social, and cultural systems should look like. Since these systems can be affected by carbon projects or programs, it is important that we are partners in the design of such projects or programs from the beginning. Fourth, does the proposed carbon credit project or program and the wider carbon market comply with our own customary laws and belief system? Some indigenous groups are clear that putting a price on nature, including on carbon, conflicts with their worldview and customary laws. It is important that the elders and traditional and customary authorities of our communities are properly informed about carbon markets and their potential effects in culturally appropriate ways. For example, proposals and contracts should be translated into our own languages. Properly informed, they can then take part in our internal processes of assessing these markets. Fifth, are there risks related to selling carbon credits ourselves? Like other commodities sold on international markets, prices for carbon credits go through cycles. Sometimes they are high, and other times they can be very low. Media and legal actions challenging companies that buy carbon credits can influence this. But don't forget, it is also important that indigenous communities understand what obligations they might take on by signing a contract with those wishing to buy carbon credits. Sixth, what would we gain or what could we lose as indigenous peoples from engaging with carbon credit projects or programs? For example, will these projects or programs contribute towards our self-determined priorities for the future? We have to remember that someone coming from the outside should not tell us what the so-called benefits would be. Instead, we should set out clearly what our own conditions and expectations are for taking part. Finally, will it help the climate if we sell carbon credits from our land? Will these markets truly benefit and respect Mother Earth and help calm her fever? In answering this, we need to remember something called offsetting. As we mentioned earlier, a lot of companies and other actors buy credits because they want to balance out excessive emissions they release themselves. Their thought is, if I pay you to not emit, then I can emit instead. And the amount of CO2 that goes into the atmosphere will remain the same. Scientists say this is not the case. For example, when an offsetting initiative is to plant or protect forests. This is because when fossil fuels are burned and released into the atmosphere, this releases carbon as CO2 that would otherwise be stored for millions of years under the ground. Trees that take off CO2 released from burning fossil fuels do not cancel that out because they will not store the carbon for millions of years. When a tree dies, the carbon will be returned to the atmosphere. If the world really wants to keep the carbon from going into the atmosphere, the best way to ensure that is to not dig up the fossil fuels in the first place. Knowing this, we would want to know who is buying the carbon credits and if they will use them to offset the continued burning of fossil fuels. In addition to the problem of offsetting, there are several other criticisms of negative climate impacts of carbon markets that we might want to familiarize ourselves with to inform what we think about these markets.
Thank you for sharing all of this with us. There is still a lot about carbon markets that is not clear to me, but I do have a clearer understanding of the link between these markets and our own lands, lives, and rights. At least I know which questions to ask if anyone comes here to talk about carbon credits and markets.
And if we still feel we don't have enough information, we can ask our allies and friends for legal and technical advice. To me, another thing is also clear. If world leaders and historic polluters are serious about tackling climate change and taking care of Mother Earth, they must help us continue protecting our lands and territories. That also means supporting and protecting our indigenous sisters and brothers at the front lines who are threatened or killed for defending their rights, lands, and environment. Polluters must respect and protect our rights under international law, including those set out in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. At the same time, they must cut their own emissions. They cannot leave all the work to us.